Good evening, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the second session of our lecture series, and I'm welcoming you all on behalf of ICOMOS India, the National Scientific Committee on Industrial Heritage. I'm the coordinator of the NSC. My name is Moulshri Joshi, and I'm joining you all from New Delhi. Very nice to see so many of you from so many different parts of the world in the session today. This session is co-hosted by two NSCs of ICOMOS India. One is the 20th century NSC and the second on documentation. And that's, ICOMOS India is unique to have 21 distinct NSCs, and the Emerging Professionals Working Group is also a co-host of this session. The current series is titled Industrial Heritage in India, and the session today, Producing Modern Heritage in Asia, is a set of two talks that Nitya, my colleague, will talk more about. But I want to just welcome you all on behalf of my co-coordinator Kamal Banerjee and my NSC, and on behalf of ICOMOS India to this session. Just to say very briefly that this idea of this session was born out of two questions that we asked ourselves. The first one was, how do we respond to how do we make a case for the preservation of modern heritage in Asia? And to answer this, we knew from experience on the ground and from the study of literature on modern heritage that the big reasons for this is the lack of recognition and protection and the lack of a shared methodological approach in dealing with this difficult heritage. So the question became, how do we protect something that we don't really quite love just as yet, just to use the words of Susan MacDonald from the Getty Conservation Institute. How do we protect something that is not yet loved? So that was our first question. And then to respond to that, we said, where can we find new thinking? Where can we find new theories and methods that are being developed to respond to this question? And then to answer that, we turn to the works of MAN, Modern Asian Architecture Network, something that was once a loosely connected network of practitioners across Asia that produced a series of encounters through which hundreds of students learned to love this heritage, and I'm one of them. So this session, we decided to invite two members of MAN, Shin Muramatsu and Zainab Kuban, to respond to this idea of modern heritage. And here we are. So welcome to all of you, and over to you, Nitya.
Thank you so much, Moulshri. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our session 2, titled Producing Modern Heritage in Asia. And we have two fantastic talks that are lined up for us today. Just to give you a little bit of an overview on what's been sort of talked about, we're basically looking at industrial heritage, a significant category within 20th century heritage, which remains at the greater risk of destruction than traditional heritage at that point of time due to lack of understanding and articulation of its values. So through the session today, we'll basically be exploring and seeing what's been happening around the world to gain some more insights and see if any of those ideas can be incorporated within the Indian context or any other context, so to speak, to protect and conserve 20th century heritage. Just to give you how the program has been laid out, the session basically we'll begin with a talk by Professor Emeritus Shin Muramatsu, and then that will be followed by observations from Professor Zeynep Kuban, which will then be followed by a moderated Q&A session where Moulshri would be chairing that session, and we'll be also taking in audience questions at that point in time. I'll begin now by introducing myself first. I'm the NSC I'm representing here. I am a conservation architect based currently in India with an interest in 20th century heritage, material conservation and adaptive reuse. I've been working in this field for over 8 years now, and I am also part of the NSC 20C, EPWG, both groups that are part of ICOMOS India, and I'm representing my National Scientific Committee on 28th Heritage today here. I will also like to take this opportunity to just give an overview of the NSC itself. Our National Scientific Committee of 20th Century is an interdisciplinary in its membership and recognizes the diversity of regional and cultural expressions in 20th century heritage, especially in India. It focuses its efforts on identification, documentation, advocacy, and protecting 20th century heritage as defined in the Indian context. So without any further ado, I'd now like to invite Professor Shin Muramatsu. I'll just introduce you and then please go ahead and the floor is yours. Professor Shin Muramatsu is the Emeritus Professor at University of Tokyo. He's also a specially appointed Professor of Graduate School of Business Design, Josai International University. He's an architectural historian, global architectural history of modern era with a focus of East Asia, architectural conservation theory. He's also co-founded MAN in 2001, also a co-coordinator of the Mansa project founded in 2015, supported by Docomomo International, ICOMOS, ISC 20C, and MAN jointly. And he's also published many books on architectural history, some of them being Shanghai Architecture and Urbanity, and a series book on mega cities. He will today be talking to us on why was the Miyakonojo Civic Hall, a metabolism building, destroyed, the roles of experts and citizens. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much. My name is Shin Muramatsu, and I will be speaking today. First of all, I would like to thank ICOMOS India and moderator Ms. Molish Joshi for inviting me to speak today. I would like to. We would also like to thank Professor Zeynep Kuban of Istanbul Technical University, also who will speaking with me and facilitating the discussion. I would like to explain the theme and title of my lecture later, but let me begin by explaining why today's session theme, producing modern heritage in Asia, was chosen. And look at this photo of the standing on my head in the Kolkata metro. Taken in March 2013, I'm a bit of an eccentric person and have always had a desire to see things differently. Standing on my head is one of those things. And by doing so, I see the world differently. But the people in Kolkata were very calm and indifferent to my headstand, and they continued to use their cell phones. My interest in modern Asian architecture may have been due to my somewhat curious personality as well as this headstand. But luckily, I met some curious friends like Molly and Zainab. When I stood on my head at the Kolkata metro, I'm sure that if they were with me, they would have stood on their heads with me. This is a group photo of MAN, Modern Asian Architecture Network, the Molly introduced right now, held in Macau, China in July 2001. It was the first movement to change the way we look at the heritage of modern architecture, which is dominated by Western value. Launched in collaboration with Dr. Johannes Widodo of the National University of Singapore, MAN brought together architecture historian, and conservation expert from as far east as Japan and as far west in Turkey. From India, Jagan Shah, Miki Desai, Kiran Joshi, and others have been participating since the beginning, including Professor Zeynep Kuban, who is giving another lecture today. The concept of the Man-Macau Declaration issued there is still valid today. You can find it on the internet. This may be the reason why today's lecture was named Producing Modern Heritage in Asia. Since 2001, we have held an international conference throughout Asia to discuss the discovery and preservation of modern architecture in Asia. Organizing annual international conference has been a challenge, but it has been very fulfilling. I think I was able to do it because I was still young. We held the Man International Conference in Shanghai in 2004. Just before the conference, we held a workshop on a factory revitalization, say the industrial heritage, with 70 students from all over the world. The person who came from India was Molly. I took my daughter, who was 6 years old at the time, with me, and I had her draw a portrait of the participant. This is one of the portraits of Molly. Since then, I have met Miss Molly many times in Germany or at Bhopal. Thanks very much for the invitation today. Now let's get down to business. This photo was taken 2 years ago, and it shows the demolition of the Miyakonojo Civic Hall that I'm going to talk about today. The site of the hall exposed and dismantled by a crane is quite tremendous. In Japan, when a person dies, they are cremated, but we never see the actual scene. If we were to see it in a person, you would be as shocked as I was by the demolition of the building. There has been a lot of reaction, both in Japan and abroad, to the demolition of its building. On the right is a website of Docomomo, Australia, with a warning against the demolition of the Miyakonojo Civic Hall. On the left is an article from the local edition of the Asahi Shimbun in Japan, reporting on the progress of the demolition. This is a Miyakonojo Civic Hall in the old days. The building is a center of the left side, looks like a porcupine or a snail. What do you think of the Miyakonojo Civic Hall that used to stand in this plain with mountains in the distance? And this is the title of my lecture today. The subject is Why was the Miyakonojo Civic Hall demolished? And the subtitle is The Role of Experts and the Citizens. After founding MAN 20 years ago, I'm finally beginning to have a philosophy of my own about conservation. Today, I would like to introduce it to you and receive your feedbacks. This is the outline of my lecture today. First, I will explain about Miyakonojo Civic Hall. And secondly, I will talk my hypothesis as to why it was demolished. Third, I will show you what I personally did. And fourth, I will give you another example to compare with the Miyakonojo Civic Hall. Fifth, I provide a perspective to summarize and compare the above. And finally, in conclusion, I present my lessons learned from these experiences and reflections. First, what is Miyakonojo Civic Hall? The Miyakonojo Civic Hall is a public event hall built in 1966 in Miyakonojo City, a small town in Miyazaki Prefecture in southern Kyushu, Japan. It was designed by Mr. Kiyonori Kikutake, who passed away 10 years ago. Kiyonori Kikutake was one of Japan's most prominent post-war architects. He was born in 1928, which means that he was just about to start university full of hope when World War II ended. This photograph is one of the most important of Kikutake's work, in which he uses RC to represent traditional Japanese architecture. He was a key member of the Metabolism architectural movement, as we will see later. His work is influenced by brutalism, the use of RC. On the left, in his own residence, Sky House, which introduced him to the world. It uses a language of Le Corbusier's modern architecture. On the far right is work from his later years. The Edo Tokyo Museum is a facility that introduces the history of Tokyo, and the exhibits are wonderful, but I've always hated this huge, ugly building. Metabolism architecture, which I have already mentioned, is an idea of architecture that originated in Japan for about 15 years from 1960. The idea was that architecture should continue to change. This was the period of Japan's rapid economic growth, and many futuristic buildings were built. Kenzo Tange was a mentor and advisor to the members of this group. In recent years, there has been a lot of interest in metabolism architecture in Japan and abroad. And the Dutch architect Paul Haas has written a book about it. The representative members of the metabolism architecture group were Kisho Kurokawa, Arata Isozaki, Fumihiko Maki, and others. The Nakagin Capsule Tower on the upper right is a representative of the metabolism architecture, but it is supposed to be demolished within a year. The Kyoto International Conference Hall in Kyoto and Fumihiko Maki's masterpiece, Daikanyama Hillside Terrace, are still in use today. The idea of metabolism architecture, that the building survives by changing, is very modern, but in reality, many buildings have been destroyed because the technology did not keep up with the idea. The metabolism architecture group was also interested in cities. The enthusiasm with which they tried to rebuild Tokyo after it was defeated in the war and burned to the ground cities. The Miyakonojo Civic Hall was highly evaluated as one of the representative works of metabolism architecture by experts in Japan and abroad. The right side in the inside of the hall This photo was taken just before the demolition, so you can see the hall was not used for many years. Why was the Miyakonojo Civic Hall, which has such a high reputation, demolished? We would like to consider it here. Here, I would like to offer 5 hypotheses. The first is the political factor. The second is the factor of metabolism architecture itself. The third is the factor of the socio-economic transformation of Japan. The fourth is the cost of maintenance. And the last is the self-satisfaction of the experts. The first hypothesis is that the building was used for the mayor's campaign. See the diagram. The construction of the Miyakonojo Civic Hall completed in 1966, and the first demolition crisis came in 2007. In 2006, a new public hall was built. Both of these halls were built or planned by long-time mayors at the end of their tenure. The mayor who built or planned them emphasized his role to the electorate. His opponent, on the other hand, claimed that the city was in a financial crisis. However, the 2 mayors who promoted the construction ironically both lost the election. It was used as a tool to win the election, so young and lively architects were chosen as designers. At the time of the design of the Miyakonojo Civic Hall, Mr. Kikutake was not yet 40 years old, and he was introduced in many newspapers and magazines as the hope of the Metabolism architecture group. My second hypothesis as to why the building was demolished is a somewhat violent form the Metabolism architecture has. From an ordinary citizen's point of view, the form is uncomfortable. In order to cut construction costs, insufficient materials were used, and the fact that buildings soon began to leak may have been a problem. In addition, the change in the surface of the concrete that occurred as the year passed were not welcomed by ordinary citizens. The building on the left is Tokyo Station, which was built more than 100 years ago. And the people I met in Miyakonojo City said that they liked Tokyo Station much more than Miyakonojo Civic Hall. The third hypothesis in the socio-economic change in Japan. When this building was conceived in 1964, the first Tokyo Olympic were held. Japan was in the midst of high economic growth. The population was growing and the future was bright. However, by 2019, the year of the demolition, the economy was stagnant and the population was declining and aging. If you look at the second Tokyo Olympics held this summer, you will understand how Japan is shrinking and how Japan needs to change. The fourth is that although we have the technology to maintain them, they are very costly and put pressure on the city's finances. As shown in the left figure, many public halls have been built after the war. However, as shown in the right figures, the number of the RC building has been demolished to 1/3 in 50 years. The reason for this is thought to be that the cost of maintaining them rather than the technical limitation. My final hypothesis as to why it was demolished is that the expert assessment of the building was somewhat self-righteous, diverging from the public view. In the 2007, during the first demolition crisis, Docomo Japan hurriedly selected the building as one of the Japan 20th century buildings. In addition, they held an academic symposium on why this building is so highly regarded. However, what was discussed there was an evaluation from a narrow perspective of architectural history. It was a second crisis, that time from 2019, where experts took a new step and presented a plan for conservation. However, not enough private companies stepped up to the response to them, leading to their demolition. This is the result of the questionnaire conducted by Miyakonojo city government to its citizens just before the second demolition crisis. As you can see in the left figure, more than 80% of the respondents were in favor of the demolition. Even though there were several factors, it was too late to leave the building, as 80% of the respondents were in favor of demolition. It seems that the experts have paid the price for not doing anything in the 10 years since the first demolition crisis. So, what did I do myself? I visited Miyakonojo City for first time in January 2019, and shortly after, reports about the demolition appeared in the newspapers. In fact, this was one of the favorite buildings that I've seen in books and had a strong impression of when I was a young student. My motto is that it is important to see it in person, so I flew there immediately. I had dinner with the members of the anti-demolition group and listened to their passionate feelings. However, the general public was different to either the demolition or the preservation. At the same time, many people expressed their memories of Civic Hall as coming of age ceremonies, weddings, and concerts held here. The divergence of opinions between the experts and the citizens caught me strongly. 3 days after my first visit to Miyakonojo Civic Hall, I started a project with 2 local friends to collect 1,000 memories about the hall. We also made a headgear in the shape of Miyakonojo Civic Hall to make it more familiar. We started many activities. These include cleaning, planting flowers, making origami, holding workshop, and organizing sketching competitions. If what the experts were doing was a strong conservation movement, ours was a loose one. This is like a recent trend in end-of-life care, which emphasizes dignity and care for a peaceful death, as opposed to strong medical care, which try to help the dying person with inserting a lot of tubes. As the elementary school right next to the building. We talked about the building, what it was, and why it's being demolished. Just before the demolition, we were allowed to open a part of the building and held a farewell concert to show our appreciation for the building. Last year, 1 year after the demolition, we also held a small exhibition of the records and artifacts related to the building. The people who opposed the demolition did not come to the farewell party. However, we believe that this kind of activity has a great meaning in preserving the dignity of the building, and in fact, inspiring attachment to another building in the future. Here's another example. Another example is the Gumma Music Center. It was built in 1961 in a small city about 1 hour north of Tokyo. My intention is stating this case is to ask why this building, which is celebrating its 6th anniversary this year, is still in existence. Of course, this question is connected to today's main theme: why was the Miyakonojo Civic Hall demolished? I would like to propose 3 hypotheses here. The first is that there is a support from the public. The second is that the activity of the music exists. And finally, the third is that the lessons learned from the demolition of the Miyakonojo Civic Hall are spreading. The first hypothesis of why this building has survived is that the support of the citizens was strong from the time of the construction. The Gumma Symphony Orchestra based here is one of the first regional orchestra in Japan to be built. It is formed immediately after the war, and the 75th anniversary is celebrated. This building, in other words, was made for the concert of this Gumma Symphony Orchestra to be performed. This music hall was built by the initiative of Usaichiro Inoue, an entrepreneur of this town and a man who is interested in culture, with donation from the citizens and support from the city. It was not built for the purpose of winning the mayor's election, but more grassroots demands. And the architect was a Czech architect named Antonin Raymond. He was not Japanese, but he was a mature man of about 70 years old that time, not like Tikitake, not like young Tikitake. Antonin Raymond came to Japan in 1919 with Frank Lloyd Wright to design the Imperial Hotel, and thereafter he continued his architectural activities in Japan, except during the World War II. In India, he designed a monastery dormitory called Kondo in Pondicherry. The architectures he designed were not avoided by ordinary people in terms of form. The second hypothesis as to why the building is still standing is that the public understanding of the building has been enhanced through music. This photo shows the scene of the concert held recently to promote understanding of the building. Although COVID-19 has subsided a little in Japan, the sight of so many people participating shows how much this building is loved. Of course, the building itself has been highly praised by experts, and architect Arata Isozaki has even said that it is one of the masterpieces of modern movement architecture in post-war Japan. Hypothesis 3 as to why the building remains today is that lessons from the many demolitions that have occurred in recent years are slowly being learned. After the demolition of the Miyakonojo Civic Hall, we have been promoting an objective discussion of why it was demolished. Of course, we received a strong criticism from preservationists for our discussions at these symposiums, but we were able to learn the next lesson. I believe that today's lecture is part of the discussion and transmission of lessons on how to conserve. However, the socio-economic situation surrounding this music hall is no different from that of Miyakonojo Civic Hall. In fact, a new and bigger hall has already been built in this town. There is also a movement to demolish this music hall. This is a new functionally good multi-purpose hall that was built in this town the year before last. As a matter of fact, the Gumma Symphony Orchestra has moved here too. The crisis of the demolition exists here as well. So, how should we understand this situation and how should we act? This is a somewhat theoretical explanation. This is called the heritage butterfly, which I invented about 10 years ago. It is a symbolic representation of the fact that heritage needs to be evaluated by both experts and the general public. There are 3 evaluation indicators. In the case of experts, there are 3 indicators: architecture historical evaluation, state of preservation, and universal value. However, ordinary people have 3 other evaluation indicators: memory, happiness that improve their lives, and whether they love it. In the same way that the butterfly cannot fly unless its wings are the same size, the heritage butterfly shows the architectural heritage cannot survive without the support of both experts and the general public. Let me explain a bit more about the heritage butterfly evaluation criteria. The 3 rating and the wings represent the past, the future, and current. Each rating, each criteria is shown in the diagram. And the value-related memories of the non-specialist is local people's memory of the whole human race. But for the experts, historical value in academic research are important. For the value related to the future happiness. Non-experts consider resource value to benefit future generation well-being of mankind are important. But for experts, people proper preservation condition and possibility of conservation and utilization are significant. And the value related to the state, a non-specialist consider affection from citizens and value as a vessel for life, then an emotional impact on all of humanity are important. But for experts, antiquity, reality, and regional characteristics and fine impression given to experts are more important. Let's take a look at Miyakonojo Civic Hall and the Gumma Music Hall from the perspective of this heritage butterfly. Although the Miyakonojo Civic Hall was highly evaluated by experts, it was very poorly understood by the general public. On the other hand, the Gumma Music Hall is highly understood by both experts and the general public. This is reflected in the current situation. In the right side of the wing is small. Various interventions by professionals are required, but in the left wing is small. The building needed already cared from the public. And when the two wings became equally large, the heritage butterfly can finally fly lightly. In the case of Miyakonojo Civic Hall, this was not the case. Incidentally, if both wings are small, I would be willing to give up on their preservation. It is impossible that all the buildings will remain. And I believe that it would be a disservice to future architects to preserve all the buildings. This is a Jakarta heritage map of Indonesia that I made about 10 years ago with my students and the Jakarta students. Each building is evaluated by heritage butterfly. However, this method is still very subjective evaluation and not so matured. And I would like to leave it to the next generation to do a more objective heritage butterfly evaluation. Now, for the conclusion, it's banal, but I'd like to address 4 important lessons. First, we will not start a preservation campaign after the demolition decided. Buildings that you like or that are important to you should be taken interested in and cared for on a daily basis. Third, think deeply about what and who you are preserving for. And finally, always keep thinking about how meaningful the preservation of the building is compared to the concern for poverty, disease, and disaster. It's a very common lesson, and maybe you'd be surprised, but that's all I'm currently thinking about. And this lesson is very similar to the industrial heritage. I would like to thank you for listening for a long time. I will now pass the baton to the moderator, Miss Molly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Muramatsu. Nitya, over to you.
Thank you so much, Moshri. Our next speaker who would be joining us today is Professor Zeynep Kuban. She's a professor in history of architecture and art at the Istanbul Technical University with an undergraduate education in archaeology. She's been active in different fieldwork missions and is still the vice director of the archaeological expedition in Demira, Turkey, managed by the Austrian Archaeological Institute. In Limra and in Istanbul, she's organized summer schools and workshops with her architectural students for the children of the local village, or in the public primary schools in Istanbul with immigrant children to develop an understanding towards the historical, architectural, and natural environment. In her understanding of education outside the university, she, together with a team of colleagues, organizes summer school for the education of architects at archaeological sites. She's also the coordinator of the MA and the PhD program in the history of art at ITU. She has been a guest professor in TU Berlin, BTU Cottbus, and LMU Munich, visiting fellow in Princeton, and is the corresponding member of the DAI, member of the ICOMOS Turkey National Committee and the Educational Committee. Today, through her talk, she'd basically be sharing with us examples from Turkey, and we'll be having a discussion after that. Over to you, Professor.
Hello, thank you very much for the nice introduction and for inviting me. And it's a pleasure to be with all of you and of course friends like Molly and Shin Muramatsu, whom I had the chance to meet first in Tokyo. And for me, it was 2006 that I could come to Tokyo and to join MAN. And for me, it was a revelation because here in Turkey, we are always seeing ourselves as West Europeans, while through MAN, I found out we are East Europeans. Through MAN, I found out we are West Asians. And in Istanbul, we are half Europe, half Asia, and I'm greeting you from the western spot of Asia. I can look over to Europe, but I prefer to remain here. And Muramatsu-san, thank you very much. I think it doesn't really matter if it's industrial heritage or 20th century heritage, even older things. It's very difficult to convince people who have an advantage of destruction to convince them to have a preservation of anything. How, we can see. And the question of what and why to preserve is for other sides is why not to destroy, and what are the reasons not to preserve the buildings. So this is probably the same thing, but just looking from two different sides. In Turkey, we have a lot of, like in India and everywhere else, we have a lot of archaeological old stuff, I would say, and there the laws are very easy. Things that are older than 1900, you have to preserve them. And then everything from 20th century and older, younger, for everything you need to have a fight. And as I said, I will not make a talk, I will respond and give some examples and try to have these catchwords that Shin Muramatsu gave us. Bidaka. Here. Yes. So, okay, you know that. So a lot of things are protected. As I said, you have to fight for each item, and but still that's not enough because you have ideological and political problems sometimes. So the building, this is the headquarters of the provincial banks in Ankara from 1937. It was just demolished. I love this photo, so I took it. It was demolished, and I very much felt like Shin Muramatsu said when he said he was so sad seeing the demolition. I really cannot look at the photos. It's so sad because it's so unnecessarily out of a purely ideological reason. And so you have the protection It was beautifully kept, but well, it's gone for no reason. And one of these so political, I think, and I think in the context of India, maybe, in Turkey, for example, the recent government, it doesn't like too much the early Republican architecture, which is quite modernist, and it is a bit different than the ideological approach. So I could imagine that you have the political problems with colonial past and non-colonial congestions of these buildings that you would like to preserve. So there is not just money and buildings, and you have also a higher issue, which was also what Shin Muramatsu said about the mayor. So you have local politics or bigger politics, but this is one issue that we cannot put apart in all these discussions, because that's one of the main issues. Pardon, what happened? Next. So we have good memories and bad memories, and I'm bringing some examples of memories. So the issue, memories that make people happy and not. So in Berlin, after World War II, they left the rest of the church of Kaiser Wilhelm. That's the memorial church, and Egon Eiermann, a German architect, made the church beside it, and this is still kept. So everybody knows it, it's everywhere, and so this is what is memory about. On the other hand, same thing, same issue in Dresden. There was the memorial of the rest of the church, which was bombed in 1945. And after the wall fell, the Berlin Wall, the East Germans and a lot of people who had left Dresden after the East German Republic established, they collected an immense sum of money to rebuild that church. So suddenly there was the wish to not to remember something they didn't like. I mean, to stop remembering ruin. And suddenly you have a complete new church that nobody remembered, because when they built that, there was almost nobody or very few people left who had seen the original building. So again, memory is something tricky, I sometimes think. And for that, I would like to give an example of Istanbul. I will give a few examples, but this is something which is very there was a topic last week and the last, I don't know, 70 years maybe. For example, this place, it's the central place of Istanbul. It's called Taksim Square. And in 1940s, a French urban planner decided that Istanbul should have a Grand Théâtre here at this square, which was opened up just recently because there were no squares. They demolished first, demolished a barrack that was here and here, to have the square, and the barracks had demolished large cemeteries. So each of the buildings had demolished already another memory. And in the end, in the 40s, they decided to have this, the opera here, where the French guy had decided to have it. And they made competitions. In the middle 40s, they started to build. So that's not exactly clear, but 47, 48 is the beginning of 45 of the building thing. And they started to build. So since 40, let's say 7, the construction started. Then this was like that. And in 56, they had enough of the ruin, of construction ruin, and that was a second building phase. So from 40, let's say 5 to 69, almost 25 years, there was the construction side. So 30 years or 25 years of a construction memory, I would say. So people never saw something else. And so it was finished in 1969. And just 1 year later, it was burned down by a fire, just in 70. And then from 70 to 77, there was a third building phase. And so in the end, from 77 to 2007, it was in use. and it was an architect who was quite known in Istanbul who did it. And so we have 30 years of construction, some plus, and 30 years of use. And then the government said it's earthquake unproof. Pardon. So here are some memories of the construction. So people have celebrations, it's bus stops or daily life in front of the construction site. And this is a memorial from a coup d'etat, and there was still the construction site. And then we have memories of protests of 1st of May, which was a disaster in Turkish history, where a lot of people were killed, or government uses it for a lot of announcements or Greenpeace or whatever. So it's also a building which has not just cultural memories, but also because of the square, this facade was always the backdrop of a lot of events. And in 2007, the government said it's not safe here anymore, and this and that. And in fact, the plot where it was on, it's very large, and it was not used enough. And probably, so it's a lot of discussion. They said, yes, it's earthquake proof. It's not earthquake proof. In the end, it was demolished. So first they said we restore it. And then in these riots in 2013, when they occupied the building, they found out that nothing had been done, and it was just ripped off of the whole quite brilliant things that were inside. So we had also, like Shin Muramatsu, done workshops with children and tried to work about this. And most of the people, they didn't even know about that building. And this is maybe a problem in large cities. So where little children or people live in some place of the city and don't even come to the center. You know, in Istanbul, there are a lot of people who have never seen the water, even though it's a city surrounded by water. And well, then earthquake matters were like modular arguments in all kinds of destruction in Istanbul. And so again, memory is something tricky. And what happened in the end, the government, who is not really too much interested in culture, but needs culture as a thing for the outside, they finally gave the commission to the son of the former architect. And it, well, again, another construction phase from 2007 until last week when they opened it. But in the end, we don't know, so much money spent. Why? Political, I think, I would say. But again, we have the issue of memories of people passing by, knowing, protesting, and expertise also, as Muramatsu said. But these decision makers very often don't care. And I think we have also problems, or we should maybe make differences between the country's internal political situations, because we have an authoritarian government, which doesn't care too much for public opinion. And then asking is something else. So also when asking, maybe I go back here, asking people, so I was looking into what Muramatsu-san said, and also into the websites about the Miyakonoji's destruction. And I can understand that people look at that deplorable situation and say, oh yes, it should be demolished. That's very easy. So, and also you can probably also ask people if they want to have a masterpiece destroyed for a large car park and broader streets, they would say yes. So then asking is also something you have to be careful about. So the people want it to be destroyed is an argument, but it should be carefully kept. And maybe we need good examples. That's important before asking, do you want this ugly and dirty thing to be destroyed? Or it can be like this. I mean, being very expensive is also an argument which I don't think is really valid. Let's look at Australia. You have in Sydney the opera, which has been built. It's so expensively built, a disaster for taxpayers, and the restoration is just the same, but nobody would ever would like to destroy it. And the argument with money, as I said, is so-so. So a lot of architects, they calculate and say restoring is not much more expensive because the destruction is very expensive. And always politicians, governments say they have no money, but they always have enough to spend it on weapons. And in the internet, I saw that the demolition of the Miyakonojo building was supposed to have costed 192 million yen, but the yearly maintenance, which was supposed to be very expensive, is 70 million. So they could have maintained it for many years for the price of the destruction. But I think it's also important what happens later. What is the wish for it? And here we come to industrial areas. They are very large, mostly. And I think this is an important thing in countries like ours, where building industry is very strong. And so it's not about the industrial thing, but about the estate, the plot that brings the money. If it's outsourced to building estate magnates. And so mostly in Turkey, for example, a lot of things have been demolished. It belonged to the government, to us, but was maintained by the government. And so they sold it out for very cheap money to building magnates, to real estate projects. And in the end, those people who profit from it is a very small group. And this is maybe something that has to be highlighted. And so when we come again to industrial heritage, the problem I think there is also, what shall we do with it? So the example of Germany with these large coal mining areas, you were talking about that, Molly, that you have also coal mining areas, we have that too, and everybody is jealously looking at the German Ruhr area, where the coal mining has been given up and large cultural properties and so on. But even in Germany, playing on that is not so easy. It's very expensive to maintain these large cultural groups. And tourism is one of the actors where they play for, that people come and come as tourists. And again, also here, I don't think that tourism is the best thing to have, because tourism is destroying what it is looking for. That's something which has double ends. And well, adaptive reuse, cultural centers, that's something, but we have so much industrial heritage, we don't have so much cultural centers to build in. That cannot be the one thing. It's very often that in universities and the projects, they say, now we have this, let's make a cultural center, a hotel or museum or whatever. But I mean, how much of that can you do? And in Turkey, in Istanbul, very often in the center of Istanbul was a large industrial area, and people gave it to private universities that popped up in the 2000s very often. In 2000s, private universities were subsidized and put into practice. And some of these industrial areas, this is a good example from the point of view of architecture and expertise, because it was a power plant from early 20th century, and a lot of prominent architects were working here, did the restoration, new implementations, very good project. They leased it from the state, the university, but in the end, it was so expensive that the founders of the university had to sell it. So the university had this good example and went bankrupt, and now it's in the hand of some people who do not care too much. So this is one thing. Another example I would like to show is a private example, which is maybe one in just one, is an old shoe factory, and it had been tried to give first to our university, then it was empty, and then a private, even a family bought it, and they made it, they didn't change anything, and in fact they called for the preservation board to inscribe the buildings as heritage. And they use it for cultural activities and as a kind of cinecittà, as stage sets, film sets. So the one up there is a film set. You can come by boat. They made a cinema, a theater. So it's a wealthy family, but they put it into a working business model. They have, I don't know, restaurants, and the old buildings were restored. These were the houses of Czech engineers who showed the Turkish people in the 1920s and 30s how to make industrial shoe, leather, and this kind of thing. For Bata came and helped. And let's come back to memory. They made a memory space in one of the halls of this large factory area, and that's open to public, and they collected everything they could find from the people, the memories. They have this little museum, exhibitions there, and that's open to public. Not everything every time, but you can come and see this, and you can come for the cinemas and these kind of things. So, yeah, I think let's maybe sum up some questions. So, protection, yes, but for what? As Muramatsu said, we have to think, can you have thousands of cultural centers or things? Is that important? And tourism, have that as one savior is also very tricky and I think dangerous. I think the argument that preserving versus poverty, that there's a lot of poor people who cannot have any sympathy to spending so much money, but I think purposes could include this kind of people. So it could have these kind of social purposes. Yeah, communal and local benefits. Yeah, again, memory is something that's important, but you can also create new memories. So it's not just that those people who have memories have the right to talk about it. Also, those people who do not have, they can get some memories. So I think there is also, it's not a per se that if a place has some memories, it should be preserved. And I think responsibility is important. The responsibilities as local or governmental level, the public. So Shin Muramatsu said we have to take care of the buildings, yes, but can everybody take care of everything? But this can be maybe be a new way of activities, responsible activities of citizens. I think that's very important. And also responsibility of architects and again the local actors, because the demolition is expensive, the pollution of the buildings is expensive, and the new building is ecologically in these next years and times it's not maintainable, because demolishing and building new is wasting much of our natural resources, all concrete and this and that. I mean, you know much better than me. And so I think, yeah, that experts, we are all in our ways some kind of experts, but the inclusion of locals and non-experts is very important, I think, because a lot of restoration projects, the experts are too far sometimes from the realities. And I think, yeah, so we have to maybe have a new distribution of responsibilities and actors. I hope I didn't talk too much. Thank you. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Kuban. That was really interesting. And thank you to the first speaker, Professor Muramatsu. There have been so many ideas between the two of your presentations that it's going to be hard to respond. And I will also need to open the floor to, I know there are several questions. I don't have comments. I have some interesting observations that I'm taking back from your discussions. And one is just to think more about the function of ruins. Not a conserved building, not something that we can preserve, but just the role of having ruins in our cities. What is it? What does it do to memory? And Another kind of a unspoken aspect of preservation is care and maintenance. And as you said about earthquakes, how that's used as an excuse to bring down buildings in India, lack of maintenance is cited. And as we saw also in the case of the Civic Hall, lack of care and maintenance is cited as one of the prime reasons to bring buildings down. In Delhi at this moment, we are bringing down several buildings, post-independence architecture, which are functioning buildings, hold, of course, public memory. They're fairly robust, and we're bringing them down for ideological reasons, but citing that their maintenance is difficult and their toilets are very dirty and things like that. Where is the role for an audience like this to look at this kind of the job that nobody wants to do, is to look at the care and maintenance of buildings, which is a continuous investment. Even as experts, there are very few people devoted to that. Professor Muramatsu talked about how we should come in. We shouldn't come in when things are already set for demolition. We need to be engaged well before that. And what does it mean to uphold a good building and its quality of life for a longer period? How does our engagement prolong that life of a building? The memory of construction that Professor Kuban you talked about, that's really the memory of being in Delhi at this moment. We are constantly building and rebuilding, and that is a memory of modern heritage that we build, and then they don't last too long for various reasons, and then we rebuild. And that as a history of architecture is significant in countries like ours. Mm-hmm. So what does that have for us? So these are just things that are the top of my head. There's a lot here to think about. I'd invite Professor Muramatsu, if you have comments back on the various cases that Zainab has shared, and then we open the floor to some questions. Yeah, but thank you very much for such charged up presentations. I really enjoyed them. Thank you.
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
I also enjoyed the Kuban's presentation. I understand much about she talked, and also understand the Molly talked. But I think in Japan, situation are a little bit different from the you. And I'm a historian, architecture historian, but I a little bit critical to the preservationist, the very activist, and I said, because of this kind of the activist, the mayors and the city government a bit afraid to preserve the building. If the people, the activist or the architecture historian approached a little bit modestly, maybe the building be preserved. Because in Japan, this kind of the preservation or activity too much. Maybe in India a little bit different. So it's difficult to explain very well, but we need to manage according to the situation, according to the country's situation. This is my conclusion. I heard from the Kuban's presentation and Molly's response. Thank you very much.
I think also that every place has different dynamics. And what I can see here, I mean, I'm not in the restoration field, but I see when you were introducing me, I'm working on this archaeological site and the history, and people hate it because it's all against their daily life. Because the rules and laws, they don't like people from the 20th century and the ugly concrete village houses because they are not historical or they don't have something from the past or whatever. But also history is not just about being beautiful, but if you do not integrate the people, then they will not like it. That's what it is. But also the laws are very strict. I understand why they are very strict. But on the other side, the strictness is kicking those actors out.
The important is the whose memory, why to preserve. So the people, architecture historian or the expert I'm familiar with all day now only interested in 20th century buildings, not much interested in the older one. Or so even the architecture histories world in Japan have the very different, very small circles, so communities. So each community have the each interest. So how can we negotiate among different interests? And also the people from the poverty or the socialist and the expert about the agriculture or plants also have the different interest. But each expert says on discipline most important. So when I studied the cities, urban histories, and cities have the different type of the how to say things and people there or animals. They also the rivers, water, and plants and insects. So what is most important among these different type of the things in the cities? I always think the architecture is not most important for me. Maybe greens is most important for me, or air, clean air is most important than the building. So I start think about the what is how to negotiate these different desire from different disciplines.
Yes, I think that's a slightly touchy subject at the moment in Delhi, speaking from one of the worst polluted cities in the world, where demolition and construction of buildings has been one of the great reasons for this pollution. It's actually really interlinked. Why are we building so much? Why are we demolishing so much? That remains really at the heart of the conversation today in Delhi. And that's linked to what you're talking about, both of you. But yeah, so I think they're not easy answers, but we need to look at it holistically. I agree, air and water, all of that is very important. And we need to put our work in perspective. So So yeah, and if there are any questions here, we have one from Naveen, and Naveen Peplani, the president of ICOMOS India, and he says, history, memory, politics, needs, economy, etc. are all value systems behind the production of monumental, historical, archaeological heritage. Do these stretch to the production of industrial heritage as well, or is there something more? Naveen, if you are in the audience, I'd be happy to have your comments.
Yes, I'm around, but I would like to hear from our eminent speakers.
In this old preservation issues, old or new, I sometimes have the feeling that there's also this fetish on patina, and which is sometimes maybe just a romance. So not always, but so we just love, oh, it's old and so beautiful and blah, 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 blah. Sometimes old things are really ugly. I mean, they're not beautiful because they're old. I mean, you don't even question something old, is it beautiful or not? It's per se nice because it's old and because it's rusty, and also this fetish of modernist architecture towards this leaking gray concrete outlook of buildings. I can understand that people don't like it. So I think we have to also weigh this, as you said, negotiate. I mean, the expertise, fetish for that, all having a Corbusier glass. I mean, I'm a bit cynical now, but I think that's also sometimes inside that we have to balance.
Harmony and balance is kind of Asian way.
Yeah.
Yes, but there's also undeniably our own power as experts to produce this, what is a desirable aesthetic and what should be preserved. I think we shouldn't also undermine that. Some of us, also members of ICOMOS across the world, have that power and the responsibility, and we create that. And by using the word producing industrial heritage, we were very intentional, because it is in this manner that we create what is a desirable thing to preserve and what is not. And we are doing it very intentionally. There may be negotiations on the way, but it is something that we are artificially, if I can say that, we are producing that sensibility. We are creating that discussion, whether it's we are making a fetish of the ruin or the rust, which is very much at the heart of the discussion with industrial heritage. Most of our inventory is rusted and ruinous. What are we creating as a desirable value for heritage? And that's really at the heart of our challenges, industrial heritage practitioners and enthusiasts too.
I just said one thing. It's also about the estate on which that is. So in places like India, also big cities like in Turkey or in Tokyo and everywhere. So very often this industrial heritage is in places where once upon a time it was empty space. It was outside of the city, and now the cities are very crowded. And of course, the people would like to have them as real estate, high-rise buildings, etc. But that's also on the other side, the chance to create new pulmons, breathing space for people, because these intense cities don't have space anymore. And that's where you can get the people together, maybe, because the rust and so on, that's just the detail. I mean, I also like it, but I think these industrial spaces have the potential. It's not like a little house or whatever, have the potential to gather a lot of people, because that's a place for, I mean, if it's in closer places to cities, if it's somewhere in the middle of nowhere, it's not so easy, but in cities, you need open spaces. People are suffocating, and from houses, they don't have place to respire. The houses are very close and whatever. And these can be many places for respiration. They do not have to be, as I said, cultural centers, but whatever, soup kitchen.
Yeah. Hasti has shared an example from Amsterdam, and this is a real estate, entire industrial area devoted to production of oil. And she has shared a link to an area which has been revitalized and reused, and as a good example to look at. Hasti, if you're there and if you have any comments, you're welcome. If there are any last questions, we'd be happy to take them, and then we'd like to call it.
Yeah. No, maybe some of you have visited these sites, but what I learned is because I have regularly contacts with the management of these sites, is that they took time to take adaptive use approach for these sites. So they didn't decide what it is, but they work together with the local community and local authorities slowly, by accommodating what the needs, especially of the people in the surroundings areas, and took them at least 15 years, I think, to grow with the idea of adaptive reuse based on local needs, until finally they took it formally through a management body. But yeah, it's 10 to 15 years. That's quite a long time, and I don't think many municipalities could afford that time. But I think this is a good examples of an what I call it an organic adaptive reuse, and it is in the middle of the city. It accommodates the need for the green, for the greens, but also for infrastructures, new infrastructures needs in the city. So it is very using a sustainable development approach, very green. Yeah, but why it is also successful, because it also look at the social and economic needs in terms of infrastructures. So I think it's a good examples in terms of process. Yeah. So don't be rushed. Take time if you can afford it. Yeah, but yeah, why we didn't have time actually? I also question this also to my experience in Indonesia. Sometimes we were to rush to demolish something or to decide on a site. Well, actually, after that, for a long time, nothing happened. It's a waste. So I think being patient is a key also. Thank you. I hope that this one of example that can inspire all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Hasti. My final question to both of you, we're coming back to where we started from MAN. Maybe 3 things that students in Asia should do, learning from the MAN approach. Professor Muramatsu, and
can you repeat the question?
I want to ask you for 3 things you'd like to leave the students here with, learning from the MAN way or the MAN's method of working with heritage. What would those 3 things be? Just some tips or some advice or 3 methods from your experience?
Yes, I'm very impressed to go out Japan, domestic area, to meet Hasti and Molish in Shanghai, Hasti in Indonesia, and it's understand the different way of thinking, different way of conservation. I think this is a very important experience I learned from MAN. So is it enough? I need to give the 3 things. 3.
You can think about the other 2. We go to Zainab.
I just thought the same. I mean, on one side, there is, you have to engage in some local way, but it's opening up these national boundaries that we are so inclined, that are just so unnatural. I mean, they were just imposed on us by somebody, and they do not mean much. So there's a lot in common. There's a lot not in common, but that's, I mean, learning from each other. I think that's important, and that's why there should be the exchange going on. It's, I mean, not so easy because, I mean, most of the countries sometimes have not the economical means, whatever, but still, I think this is also a medium for getting an exchange of ideas. But I think for students, it's important to think beyond these stupid limits that are in our heads.
Yeah, I think about second tips. The also going beyond the country boundary, but also we need to go beyond the discipline boundary. We are now learn in architecture history or architect conservation, but as I mentioned previously, the water or plants, agriculture or polluted, and people and health. Hello. The other things are also important. If you learn more about different viewpoints, maybe it is useful. Come back to your own discipline. You go more far than before. This is second I want to say. Kuban?
Well, I was just thinking of Man. For me, it was the food, which is
food.
the greatest experience you see. I mean, because buildings are so common everywhere, but still you can see these differences in the taste on your tongue, which is completely different from Japan to in Delhi, and I thought this is when you understand. So these high-rise buildings, they are everywhere, and then some after a while you don't even know where you are, but that brings you back, and you still know you can learn a lot.
Yeah.
Think about
maybe third is the head standing. Curious spirits, eccentric spirits. Please, the head standing in the metro in Tokyo or other cities.
I couldn't find the third one.
No, thank you. Thank you for this. And those are very wise words. I know they mean a lot more than you seem to say. So there's a lot of deeper work out there. I'd like to hand over to my colleague and the PhD
excuse
scholar.
Excuse me.
Yes.
One question to you.
Yes.
Yes. I want to know a little about the Bhopal after we had a workshop there.
Okay.
Anything happened?
So just for everyone else who's here, this is about the Bhopal, the Union Carbide factory in Bhopal, which has been one of the sites for the MAN workshops. And we had several scholars and students joining us in the city to do a hands-on workshop. This was in 2011. In fact, our friend Vishakha Kavatekar from Bhopal is also here in the audience. From 2011, when we all met and we published a book, there hasn't been any active preservation of the factory, and it's in ruins. And for me, a butterfly approach was really also to look at whether we will fly gently. I'm not so sure. I think the factory is not very well loved, and whether it should survive based on public opinion, it might be negative. And that's the challenge here, because we see an afterlife, we see a future, we see that there is ways in which it can do more work as a ruin in the city, just standing there in the city of this chemical disaster. But it hasn't met with any action on the ground. So the factory stands in a much worse condition than we left it in 2011. But what it did, and what is very much like the MAN workshop, is that we took that anxiety and that concern and that energy actually to other sites. So I know so many of the people who met there were able to take that into other roles, including, you know, activist roles, to other sites, and look at modern buildings, industrial sites in other ways. So not just the factory, but also the stories that we documented around the community. And that for me is the template that MAN gave us as a way to working with buildings and memories together. You know, so spend time, get your, you know, it's hands-on, but it's sort of brainless, if I can say. You know, you work with your senses. You're not just thinking in an intellectual way. You're walking, you're thinking, you're talking, spending time with, you know, people from other parts of the world, and using that sense, which as a student, we're not really confident of using our other senses. That's what I learned from MAN. That's what I learned from all of you in Bhopal. And I think that learning goes a long way. I wonder if that is also the Asian way to work with our sites, a kind of slower and a more messy way to work, if I can say. Yeah, so yeah, but I will also in private send you more updates from Bhopal. Thank you for asking.
Thank you.
Yeah. Jan is also here, who was a part of the workshop from Stockholm, and he shared the name of the book that many of us here have been a part of on Bhopal. Yeah, and if there are no more comments also, because we've really overshot our time, I'd like to invite my colleague and a PhD scholar, Abantika Mukherjee, to say a few words and to thank the speakers from our behalf.
Thank you, Monshi. Good evening to everyone present here. My name is Abantika Mukherjee, and I would like to take the honor of delivering the vote of thanks. On behalf of NSC Industrial Heritage, NSC Documentation, NSC 20th Century Heritage, and the EPWG of ICOMOS India, I would like to express my utmost gratitude to our esteemed speakers, Professor Shin Muramatsu and Professor Zeynep Kuban, for their presence and contribution to make this public lecture a great success. The lecture on Miyakonojo City Hall by Professor Shin brings forward similar cases in our country, as our moderator Molshi Joshi has already mentioned, for structures like the Hall of Nations, IIM Ahmedabad, buildings around the Central Vista in our country, which are demolished or either demolished or slated for demolition. The major issue that these are seen to be that these are too ordinary to gather support for protection. In this context, the butterfly approach as proposed by Professor Shin brings about a very enlightening theory that there needs to be a balance for the needs of the non-specialists and the experts, which might be of interest for future protection of such buildings in our country. The examples from Turkey, as explained by Professor Kuban, brings forward important lessons for both experts and citizens. An important lesson is protection by law is not enough, which is very important to understand even in our Indian context. And another important thought-provoking question is that whose memory are we protecting? So this is something which needs a food for thought. Moving forward, I must also thank our moderator, Molshi Joshi, and the coordinating team for working very hard to make this series a great success. And a big thanks to all the participants who have joined us from across various countries, and also the viewers in our page, in our Facebook page where this is cast live, for your active participation and immense support. I would now like to request moderator Monshi Joshi for the concluding remarks for this session. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no concluding remarks. Just want to extend invitation to all of you for our next session, which is going to be the third one. And we will talk about transport heritage. This is on the 21st of November. And of course, we will send you all email invites and we will post the information on social media. On the 21st, we will discuss highways, roads, and also waterways and boats as heritage. So we will have two interesting speakers. So please continue to join us in these sessions. It's very important to maintain this continuity of discussion with all of you to build for us an understanding of what we are looking at as modern industrial heritage. So thank you for your participation. Thank you for your comments. And we all will see you on the 21st. Bye-bye. Have a nice evening.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.